Hi, everybody, and welcome to my 17th episode. I think this is. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I am 17 episodes into this podcast. I am following on from a little mini series that I have been doing, and we're talking all about the menstruation and your 28-day cycle. And I've been doing this for people who are menstruating, but people who aren't. And the reason is because if you are someone who doesn't menstruate, you will probably know someone who does. And I think it's important that we all understand what is going on in that person's body because it's a lot. Some people will find it easier than others to go through. And some people will be affected at different points, more intense than others. Obviously, every body is different. And if you are someone who does menstruate, I think if you're like me, I actually didn't know anything about it at all. My knowledge from school was abysmal, honestly. So, yeah, I've kind of, after 14, 15 years of menstruating, I have decided to actually learn about what's going on in my body. It's blown my mind. And obviously, doing a wellness podcast, I wanted to bring all of that to you guys. So, you kind of, if you're like me, or if you just want a little bit more knowledge, you can learn from me. My last few episodes, I have been talking about each stage, where they are in the cycle day wise, and also what foods are really helpful to bring into each of those cycles to support you, or cycles, each of those phases to support you in your cycle. This episode, I am going to be talking about yoga on your period, which I think is something that isn't talked about very much, especially in the Western world. But I'm a yoga teacher. I find it very interesting, and I think it's something that should be taught a little bit more, um, especially if you're a Western woman who struggles when they're on their period, but yet they feel like they have to go to a yoga class, little things like that. What can and can't you do? What might help you a little bit more? So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Obviously, yoga has a very deep history, so we'll go into that as well, and kind of where the origins of it all have come from. So yeah, I think let's just get straight into it. Hi, my name is Meg, and you are listening to the Wellness Musings with Meg podcast. I am a fully qualified beautician and yoga teacher who has studied and worked in health and wellness since 2017. I have been obsessed with wellness my entire life and have always wanted to share my passions more. If you love health, wellness, and yoga and want to learn more, this podcast is for you. I will be bringing you all things wellness, from diet and lifestyle to beauty tips and tricks, and of course, yoga as well. So grab yourself a green tea and find a tranquil spot, and let's jump in. So, yoga has been around for many years, hundreds of years. It has a rich history, and it all started in India. And I think if we're going to talk about periods within yoga, we need to address where it all originated and how they will have approached it many, many years ago. When you look at Indian culture, past and present, it's obviously going to be very different to what if you're like me and you live in England, or you're in a Western population or a westernized country, they are different. And I know in southern India, often your first period is kind of like seen as your transition into womanhood, and it's actually celebrated. And like to the point where they have parties with invitations sent out. Yeah, so not everywhere in India does that. And not every person will obviously do that in southern India, but I know that there are some people that do that. So your period is kind of a big deal, and I think it always has been in Indian culture. And the history of how India approached women on their period, I actually love. I think it's so kind and well thought out. When you compare it to other countries, and other histories where they can be a little bit brutal, I love it. I think it's such an important message to send. So Women in India in history, during their period, they would actually have a rest time. So they would literally rest on their period, whether it was 3 days, 7 days, however long they're in on their period for, they would completely rest. And this means like no cooking, no cleaning, household chores, staying in their bedrooms, completely resting and relaxing. And bearing in mind, obviously, an Indian woman 200 years ago is very different to an Indian woman now, but I mean, Western women, very, very different. We have hoovers, washing machines, dishwashers, everything that we could possibly need. So we're not working anywhere near as hard. But back then, women would do very intense kind of physical labor. So when they were on their period, it was kind of a necessity for them to stop and to relax. But I also find it fascinating that there will be a lot of women nowadays who do very intense exercise, whether it's in the gym, whether it's running, swimming, yoga. They do very intense exercise, but they don't give themselves that break. They often work as well. So they'll often work. A lot of women will work, do a lot of heavy exercise, possibly have a family. Like we have a lot going on. So I love the fact that actually, when you're on your time of the month and your body is going through such a huge transition, that back then you were allowed to stop. It was perfectly acceptable to stop. I know women who will literally like have had to call into work sick because their periods are so bad, and especially male employees, they think it's unacceptable. They've never been through it. And it can really be, I don't know what word to use other than a swear word. It can be awful. It can be so, so draining. And some women will have it easier than others, but I think we need to approach this with compassion. Back then, these Indian women, they didn't have to have this rest period, but it was optional and it was acceptable if they wanted it. And I think we have to remember as well that back then there was what you call period poverty, which is still around now, and it's not very nice. Basically, women not having access to period products, so tampons and pads, whatever they need. And I think back then it would be very difficult to continue to do your work and continue to do everything, especially if you're someone that has a heavy flow. If you haven't got tampons and pads, we take them for granted. If you're, like me, living in a Western society, they're just, I mean, I know women that complain in this country because they have to pay and they think that they should have them for free, which I do agree with. I think every woman should have the right to it. In Australia, I think they're now tax-free period products. Don't hold me to that. I've got an Australian aunt and I'm fairly confident she told me that once. Um, but I think we need to recognize our privilege in that we do have access to it, and they do make a huge difference. I mean, think about it. Think about if you're a menstruating woman like me, and we've probably all been there if you're someone who menstruates, where you suddenly your period starts, and that's just one moment, one starting moment. Like it could be an hour where you've had to, you're in the midst of doing something and suddenly your period starts. You go, oh my God, I don't have any sanitary products. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm just going to have to deal with it. That is horrible enough. Imagine even 10 minutes where you think, oh my God, my period started and I need to get to a bathroom or whatever. And you're driving, for example, or something like that. And you think, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do? That is such a drop in the ocean, no, no pun intended, compared to an entire cycle, 7 days for some people, 7 days of a heavy flow with no pads, no tampons. What do you do? How hard is it going to be to do your daily life, your daily routine? How self-conscious would you be? I mean, I will have pads and tampons in when I'm on my time of the month, but it doesn't mean I'm not worried about there being a leak and someone, seeing and it happens. Now, imagine if you don't have that sanitary protection. you are going to feel extremely exposed. So back then, I can completely understand why they're like, no, I'm taking this time off. Because when you add in how hard they worked, plus the period poverty, and also the kindness and the acceptability that actually their body is going through a heck of a lot, they should be able to stop. I I think it's a really nice way to look at womanhood, and I think it's something that every woman should take into their life with them nowadays. I do think it's something that they need to be aware of. You you need to be honest with yourself. Are you taking the mick? Are you calling in sick when actually you're all right and you could, get up and pretend, you could easily go and walk the dog and then go for a swim and then cook a dinner, and you're not really that in that much pain. But if you are someone who is really like your head's pounding, you physically can't get out of bed, I think it should be completely justified that if you need that time to let your body do what it needs to do, you should be able to. When you get sick and you catch a sickness bug and your work doesn't want you in for that, that's acceptable. If you're throwing up continuously, you can't stop yourself from doing that. And a period works exactly the same. You can't stop yourself from getting a period. Well, I guess unless you took a mini pill and you took a pill that the contraceptive pills that don't give you one, but that is your decision and your choice. But you can't stop your body from doing what it needs to do. So I think that that's what I love about Indian culture and Indian history, is that the fact that women were allowed to stop. And let's remember that yoga originated in India many, many years ago. Therefore, when you add yoga in, we're accepting that it's absolutely fine to stop, to not do any yoga if you need to. Can you do yoga on your period? Of course you can. Can you do yoga on your period? Of course you don't have to. And remembering as well that there are so many different types of yoga. You've got, asana classes that are really intense. You've got vinyasa and ashtanga, but then you've got yin yoga, which, and you've got restorative yoga. You've got all these types of yoga classes. Some are going to be a lot easier than others. So again, you can always moderate in that way. You can moderate your practices in that way. But listening to your body is extremely important, and don't be ashamed or don't feel bad if you want to stop, if you feel like you can't do it. And I think in Western society, because we don't view being on your period in the same way, we see it as a weakness or something that you need to push through and to keep going, and don't worry about resting, or it's not that bad. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I think it's important, and you shouldn't feel guilty if you need to skip your yoga class because your time of the month is so intense. You should do it, and don't feel bad for it. It's important to listen to your body. That being said, if you feel like you can do it, go for it, enjoy it, love it. I think as well, it's important again in Western culture, when we talk about yoga, we don't necessarily teach students what they, or what our menstruating students should and shouldn't be potentially doing during their class. So, for example, what I mean is, when you're going into a yoga class and you're menstruating, there are a few things that you should avoid, and there are reasons for doing so. So, things like deep back bends, anything that puts a lot of strain on the tummy, and deep twisting, lying on your belly. So, think bow pose, but with your deep back bends as well. Bow pose is another one. Anything that is going to really heat up the body. But one thing that I think is extremely important, which we don't teach our students, and it starts to take it into yoga philosophy a bit more, is not doing inversions. Mild inversions are okay. And when I say not doing inversions, I mean headstands, handstands, pincher, anything like that. Anything where your whole body is completely upside down. And there is a reason, when you look at yoga philosophy, why they say this. Because we're not stupid. We know it's not, doing an inversion is not going to stop you from being able to have a period. It's not going to do anything that it's not scientifically, it's not going to do anything. But yoga is not about science. There is so much more to yoga than just the black and the white and scientific fact and not. There's a reason yoga has been around for so many years and why it's so popular. And for so many years, there hasn't been the science behind it to prove how amazing it is and how good it is. Yoga has always been ahead of its time. And it will forever be, it's something that will be around forever, because it is so incredible. When you look at yoga, when you start learning more about the philosophy, you have prana. And so when you're doing an inversion, you have something called apana prana. Now, this means expelling everything from the body. It's the prana that you use to eliminate from your body in various different ways. So anything that needs to be expelled out of your body, we need to encourage that. Apana is things like allowing yourself, and a lot of students will feel really guilty or like embarrassed if they, for example, in a shavasana, if they cough or sneeze, or if they need to yawn, or if someone's doing an asana, so a movement, and they do a blow off or they burp, and they're like, oh my god, that's apana. We're encouraging that. We want to expel whatever doesn't need to be in the body, and we need to let it out. So that's absolutely fine. If you ever go to a yoga class, please don't be embarrassed if you do anything like that. And if your teacher makes you feel embarrassed, choose a different teacher, because that is part of yoga, is expelling what shouldn't be in your body. So this being said, we want to encourage that period to come out of you. We want it to allow to come out and flow out of you. And when you're in an inversion, obviously you're tipping upside down and it cannot do that. It's prana that is not meant to be held in the body, so we need to let it out. And this is why we avoid inversions when you're on your time of the month doing yoga. Often, if you go to a Western class and you have a Western teacher, I don't think it's taught in many like 300-hour yoga classes or curriculums. This part, certainly not the one I did. I found out about this through a amazing podcast called Let's Talk Yoga, and it's a very, very, very brilliant podcast. But they talk about yoga on your period, and that's where I learned all of this from there. But often in a Western class, with a very westernized teacher, they may not be able to, or they may not know any of this. So if you go to a teacher and in your class and you say, I'm on my period, what can I do? They will probably say to you, oh, just take it really easy, listen to your body. But they might still decide, oh, we're going to do arm balances today. We're going to come into crow pose, for example. Or we're going to do a deep twist. Or we're going to work on our back bends. If you have a good teacher or a teacher that has this knowledge, they will be able to modify the class for you and tell you what you can do. They'll often say, like, if you're not doing inversions today, or if you're not doing a back bend today, this is what you can do instead. So it's like telling people who are on their time of the month without physically saying, if you're on the time of your month, and like singling people out. But I think it's important as well, if you're a student who, if you, for example, love your teacher, but they don't have this knowledge, that you have it yourself. So if you are on your time of your month and you're feeling like you want to go to your class, it's important that you sort of in your class go, oh, okay, well, we're doing, for example, you're in a vinyasa class and your teacher goes, right, we're going to come into wheel pose. So you start to come into this back bend. Now you can instead go, right, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do the beginning sections of it. So bending one knee or bending one leg, straightening the other. And then instead of coming into a back bend, just take your arm up towards the ceiling so you're not bending your back. Things like that. Because you have your own knowledge, you can amend it to help you. So I do think it's important as a student to learn what to do, but I do think if you're a teacher, it's important to have, even if it's a small amount of knowledge. I'm not going to sit here and say that I have loads of knowledge about this subject. I know what I know, but I do think it's important to have some idea, because you never know when you're going to get asked that question, and you never know if that is ever going to come up, but it might well come up. So I think it's an important thing to learn, and it is for women. It's a constant thing that happens until you become menopausal, and it happens to, I mean, if you think about it, if you have a class, even if you have a mixed class, so you have 50% of people who do menstruate and 50% who don't menstruate, that's 50% of your class. And I know from a lot of my yoga classes that often there are a lot more menstruating women that come to classes, or women in general, than there are men. And I know that people will come under different identities, but I'm talking about anatomically, having a womb, being a menstruation, being someone who menstruates. There will be often more menstruating people than non-menstruating people, or at least people who have menstruated in the past and are then going through menopause. Listen to your body. Always listen to your body on your time of the month, and do what you feel is right for you, and don't feel like you have to justify it to anybody else. If you need to have a break, go for it. If you feel confident and you feel happy doing it, do it. The only person that is going to get affected by your actions is you. So if you want to do it, go for it. If you don't feel like you can, don't do it. You don't need to justify it. Listening to your body is such a powerful tool and such an important tool when we talk about wellness. So yeah, definitely take it easy, and choose different classes for maybe different parts of your cycle. Like if you're someone who knows that in their luteal and their menstruation phase that you really do get affected, maybe start going into more like restorative yoga classes for that. But if you're someone who, and then maybe during like Ashtanga, Vinyasa, during things like your follicular and your ovulation period, or kind of work it around with what feels best for you. Take note onto where you feel rubbish and where you feel good, and where you feel like you can supplement different types of yoga in. So don't forget as well, you can always use YouTube videos. So if you need to take a step back, maybe you're like me and I religiously go to a Vinyasa class and I love Vinyasa, but if I need to stop, instead I'll have a look at YouTube, and maybe follow someone on YouTube that can help me and do more like a restorative session. Obviously, being a teacher, I guess I don't do that much because I can tailor my own classes. But if you're someone who isn't in the know so much, use the tools that you have. Use YouTube. Use all these different things. Look at Instagram. Look at TikTok. Follow different teachers. Yeah, enjoy the journey. But it's important to find out about you and your personal feelings and your personal body. I hope this helps. I hope that this video or this podcast has kind of enlightened somebody, or helped them to feel like it's okay to feel the way that they do at their times of the month, or when they feel like they have to cancel a class, that's okay actually, and you're normal and it's completely fine and justifiable. And to give people that opportunity to tune in with themselves and their body and see what's going on internally, and then to modify accordingly. Yeah. Next week, I am going to be talking all about different kind of, when you're in each phase, how to tailor exercises or what to start thinking about in your exercise routines. So I think it'll be a smaller episode next week. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Please please subscribe, and I look forward to talking with you again next week. Thanks. Bye.